good evening. Welcome to Sustainable Mobility Session, Global Green Growth Week 2022. My name is Chang Sun-dan, who is a lead in transport and sustainability. It is my great honor to organize and introduce the session of utilizing green finance, new market mechanism for accelerating the adoption of the e-mobility, limiting the global temperature rise to below 2 degrees Celsius, changes this transport emission trajectory. Because of the transport is one of the biggest sector emitting the greenhouse gas emission. That's why the Paris Declaration of electromobility calls for the deployment of electric vehicles with a 20% share of all load in 2030. To achieve this goal, it is indicated that electric vehicles need to represent 35% of global sales in 2030. Electric vehicles, however, is still at an infant stage in most developing. Closing the gap between the reality and the target requires global finance and carbon market mechanisms. In this line, this session is designed to share the knowledge on how to utilize green finance and new market mechanisms to facilitate the adoption of e-mobility, and to share the lessons learned from the relevant stakeholders. Thank you. Okay, to share the lessons learned from the relevant stakeholders who have experience of e-mobility activities. With this purpose, for the first part of the session, we have two presenters from GGGI and Korea Research Institute on climate change to introduce the global e-mobility activities and Paris Agreement Article 6 mechanism. After the presentations, the panel discussion will start with 6 panelists. To kick off the session and welcome all of the participants, we have Director General Dr. Frank Reisberman with us to give his opening address. So please welcome Dr. Reisberman.
Thank you, Chang-sung. I think it's this one that I'm actually using, so please mute it again. I think it's that camera and this microphone. So we're good. All right. Again, welcome all participants in this session on e-mobility, sustainable transport, as part of our Global Green Growth Week. Clearly, the current energy crisis with the very high prices of petrol at the pump are giving all users of the regular transport, if you like, additional motivation to look for alternatives. But as Chang-sung already said, the price of electric vehicles is still relatively high. So finding alternative sources of finance is definitely an interesting avenue to explore. I hope we'll learn from the presenters what the prospects are to indeed use green and climate finance and Article 6 carbon credits for sustainable mobility. Traveling around in our member countries this year, many of which are struggling right now, either with the economic recession that resulted from the COVID-19 crisis or the latest crisis caused by the war in the Ukraine. Transport is definitely taking becoming a subject of special attention. And I learned while traveling that people are more and more optimistic as well about the possibility to convert older ICE cars to electric vehicles. And yes, while for developed countries, the labor cost might be prohibitive for such conversions, in countries like where I most recently visited in Sri Lanka, where the government has forbidden import of new vehicles to save foreign currency, but where there is a relatively high skill in automotive technology and relatively low labor cost, there may be an attractive opportunity as well for such conversions. So that is another subject I hope to learn a little bit more about this afternoon. GGGI has worked on a number of projects, as you'll learn, no doubt, this afternoon, mostly focusing on electric buses. And while we've seen a number of relatively small projects, initially 3 or 5 pilot buses, now this year at least 50 buses in one state in Mexico. That is only one segment of the market. Other interesting developments in Asia are to have electric tricycles or electric tuk-tuks. I have to say, a few years ago, I was in Beijing, stepped in a tuk-tuk late at night, was very surprised to not hear the usual sound, and learned that in 100 of the biggest cities of China, all smaller motorized vehicles have by law become electric. So yes, there definitely are technological solutions and they can be introduced at scale. And I hope that through this session, we'll learn more about opportunities to introduce such solutions at scale in our GGGI member countries as well. So once more, welcome to all speakers and participants in this exciting session. Changsheng, back to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. Thank you for your opening this session. So now I'd like to invite Dr. Julia Hollnagel as the first presenter. She is a senior officer for Pacific Transport and Sustainable Mobility. Today, she will present the GGGI approach to supporting the uptake of e-mobility in our member countries with a diverse set of the case studies. So Julia, the screen is yours. Thank you. So Julia is joined the GGGI last year. So she is in charge of all of the transport activity in the Pacific area. So thank you to the Julia's great support. We expand our e-mobility activities in Pacific area for Fiji and Tuvalu and Vanuatu as well. So thank you, Julia. Okay, there is some technical issues. So let me, before the Dr. Julia, let me invite Mr. Ji-hyun Kim. Ji-hyun Kim is a team manager in Korea Research Institute on Climate Change, KRIC. Mr. Kim will present Paris Agreement Article 6 mechanism, including internationally transferred mitigation outcome, ITMOs. And also he will introduce how to utilize ITMOs for facilitating the adoption of e-mobility. So Mr. Kim, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Okay, so sorry about that. Yes. So hello everyone. I'm Ji-hyun Kim from Korea Research Institute on Climate Change. So before beginning my speech, I give my special thanks to the organizers and the people behind the scene for inviting me to this meaningful session. So today, I'm going to talk about e-mobility ITMO project under Paris Agreement Article 6. So to achieve the sustainable mobility society in this new climate regime era, I believe that it is really important to know how the international climate change response is going on, to define what is ITMO and the project respectively, and to know the characteristics of e-mobility projects and some ways to go through. Now I will start my speech. Yes, so the first chapter is about the international climate change response. I will just emphasize some points that I take important from Paris Agreement Article 6. We cannot discuss ITMOs project without mentioning the Paris Agreement. The most important characteristic from the Paris Agreement is the 197 parties are joining. So under the global 1.5 Celsius goal, 197 parties have submitted their own national determined contribution. So this means that all the participating parties must find their own ways to deal with climate crisis. These facts have led to the necessity of international greenhouse gas mitigation cooperation. So as mitigation is not a country's problem, but the world's problem, so the world's common international greenhouse gas mitigation system called Paris Agreement Article 6.2 and 6.4 has been introduced. Let's have a closer look at Paris Agreement Article 6 mechanism. There are two kinds under Paris Agreement, Article 6, and they are corporate approach and 6.4 mechanisms. Corporate approach is a voluntary basis system between parties in the form of bilateral or multilateral cooperation, while 6.4 mechanism is a system managed by supervisory body under UNFCCC CMA. The MOS comes out from 6.2 and a 6.4 ERS comes out from Paris Agreement Article 6.4. And finally, ITMOs can be achieved when MOS and a 6.4 ERS are internationally transferred through corresponding adjustments. So I can define that the ITMOs is an outcome that is issued for each party's NDC implementation when they are internationally transferred through corresponding adjustment from the form of MOS and a 6.4 ERS. So now let's move on to e-mobility ITMO project. I'd like to talk about the definition of the ITMO project, the types of e-mobility project, opportunities and barriers of it, and some kind of relationship between ITMO project and ODA fund. The first is the definition of ITMO project. I can definitely say that to achieve the successful result of ITMO project, there should be an appropriate project area, technologies, some kind of supporting fund, and ITMO agreement between the participating parties. I experienced difficulties in supporting Korean small and medium-sized private entities in designing ITMO projects. The concept was good and the network that they had was good too. But they didn't really have an eligible project site, technologies, and understanding of ITMOs. I helped for them to find the project sites, technologies, and get the letter of intention of ITMO transfer first, and then I could help them to get support fund from the government and public institutions. It is really basic thing, but many project participants miss it. So in ITMO's project, ITMO agreement or the letter is the most important, as the ITMO is issued only when corresponding adjustment authorization is done by participating parties. Let's take a closer look at the requirement ITMO issuance and the condition where we are looking for cooperating party. You can refer to the requirement of ITMO under CMA3 decision as follows in the presentation, but we need to look more likely to focus on the requirements of our cooperating party. The first, the country should be a party of Paris Agreement and have submitted their own NDC. Actually, it is quite clear because this kind of cooperation is implemented in between the Paris Agreements. The second, there should be ITMOs authorization body. As I have said that ITMO can only be issued under each participating party's authorization. So when having cooperation with other country, some kind of joint committee has to be established. So third, there needs an accounting system for transferring mitigation outcomes. The method is to develop ITMO registry, some kind of bank accounts, and to manage them under national inventory reports. And lastly, the project that we are going to develop should meet each country's NDC and the RADS. Let's move on to e-mobility project. And what is e-mobility? It is the use of electric cars as well as e-bike, electric motorbikes, e-buses, and e-trucks, and tuk-tuks. And those kind of, the common feature of all of them is that they are using partly or fully driven electrically. To find the possibilities of e-mobility ITMOs projects, we need to check how many kinds of e-mobility projects are approved in the worldwide. I could simply find them in the CDM pipeline. There were about 19 methodologies registered and 27 transportation projects are approved. And among them, only 6 e-mobility projects are approved. From this fact, we need to think why the numbers of e-mobility projects are relatively low. So opportunities and barriers of the e-mobility projects. So I have suggested the characteristics of the e-mobility project and divided into 2 opportunities and 2 barriers. The first opportunity is the e-mobility project have a huge greenhouse gas mitigation potential. In 2016, global greenhouse gas emissions were about 49 billion tons, and among them, 12% came out only from the road transports. And when converting these kind of vehicles into the low carbon vehicles, we could achieve about 6 billion tons at maximum. The second opportunity is about the high social impact. I believe that compared to other sectors of climate change, transport sector is highly related to nations living and public use. So transitioning to e-mobility can reduce their cost of living. While the first barrier and the main risk of the e-mobility project is high cost. To provide e-mobility, high cost of infrastructure is necessary. For example, the electric vehicle itself and EV chargers and a lot kind of infrastructure like the load is needed. And the another barrier is about monitoring issue. As I have told you that ITMO is real, verified, and additional unit. And to make this real and verified, some kind of monitor data like the distance and the energy used from numerous of e-mobility should be secured. So I can conclude that one huge barrier from e-mobility project is a financial issue. Then, how can we reduce the risks from these identified barriers? I highly believe that the answer is at ODA fund. In 2004, the OECD DAC have decided that CDM activities could be ODA eligible. Given the Paris Agreement Article 6 and CDM project are similar, ODA DAC has started to decide whether to continue to apply the decisions in 2004. OECD decision agendas are as follows in the presentation, and in the second phrase, the value of any ITMO risk with ODA finance project leads to deduction from OD value. It is a deduction from OD value, not from the ITMO values. So which means that when we implement ODA-related greenhouse gas mitigation project, we can earn this kind of ITMOs. To clarify the OECD DAC agenda, I have brought some examples. Let's suppose that we are the donor country and we have committed about 30 million USD in grants or loan. And let's say that actual ITMO amount for full crediting period is about 100,000 ton. And let's suppose the ITMO project is ITMO price is 25 USD per ton. So the total ITMO value will be 2.5 million USD. And let's suppose the grant element is the 100% to grant and 25% to loan. At the first stage, when donor country committed 30 million USD to beneficiary, the expected OD value is 30 million USD from the grant and 7.5 million USD from the loan. And at the next stage, 30 million USD is dispersed to beneficiary, and they made 100,000 ITMO from the project. And the ITMOs will be transferred and 30 million USD will be reimbursed in the case of loan. And finally, as the ITMO value is deducted from OD value, so the actual OD value will be 27.5 million USD in grants and 5 million USD in loan. So as a result, we as a donor country have committed 30 million USD and earned 27.5 million USD of OD value from the grant and 5 million USD of OD value from the loan. And we also get 100,000 ITMOs from this OD-related greenhouse gas mitigation projects. While the beneficiary country have used 30 million USD in grant or in loan, when they have lost about 100,000 ton. While the actual supposed OD value was 30 million USD, so extra value corresponding to the ITMO value should be recommitted. And here, the one problem from this is that how to decide the carbon price, because the carbon price is different from market to market. So if the carbon price is high, it is good for the beneficiary country, while if it is a relatively lower price, it is good for the donor country. Yes. But I find that these kind of OD finance projects are appropriate for high cost and low ITMO project like the mobility sector, as the extra OD expenses will be relatively lower. Yes. So summarize today's short speech. Due to the introduction of the Paris Agreement, 197 countries' participation have led to development of common system. Under that common system, called Paris Agreement Article 6, ITMOs can be achieved for NDC goals under the authorization of each participating parties. While to make the mobility ITMO project successful, there needs an appropriate cooperating country based on CMA 3 decisions, and it is necessary to find appropriate project sites and funds as well. E-mobility ITMO project has high potential of greenhouse gas mitigation and social impacts, while the high cost leads to unpopular projects. To solve the problem, OD fund can be one good option, as OECD DAC started to discuss continuing 2004 decisions that ODA finance projects are eligible for greenhouse gas mitigation project, while there are some deduction of ODA value. So I believe that this could be developed as one good model or program to drive the world greener and save our Earth. So thanks so much for listening. And this was Jay from KRIC. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kim. It is very helpful, the presentation for us to understand ITMO. Actually, ITMO is a very unfamiliar the concept or the new kind of the mechanism in the climate change sector, but you are very kindly explained and very described, very useful to us understand the ITMO. Thank you, Mr. Kim. And our second presenter, so now I also would like to invite Dr. Julia Hollnagel again. So, Julia, the screen is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Chang-sun, for the introduction, and sorry for the initial technical hiccup here. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone joining. In the next 10 to 15 minutes, roughly, I will walk you through to the work GGGI is doing in the field of sustainable mobility and our member countries, with the main focus being the work supporting the countries kickstarting and increasing the uptake of electric mobility solution within the framework and the target of transport decarbonization. So the presentation is split up into 3 sections. The first one being the GGGI's approach to sustainable transport. Then a large focus introducing examples of our work in projects from the field, and in the end, showing how we're contributing to the decarbonization of transport. So our focus is, our priorities in the transport sector are split up into 3 main areas. The first one being the mainstream of sustainable transport in relevant policies and development plans, assuring that they are aligned with the country's support to meet the decarbonization of transport targets, as many have in their NDCs. The second one is developing projects and programs for electric mobility solutions. This ranges from pilot projects who support countries to gain initial first-hand experience and trust in this new technology, to also large-scale upscaling of electric mobility solutions. And the third priority is the overall strengthening of the capacity of the member countries for the decision makers and private sector, and also the outreach to the general public to create a consciousness about the benefits of electric mobility solutions. As an organizations, we have experience in the transport sector in over 22 of our member countries, which is over half of our member countries. And it spans across the globe, as you can see in this graphic, from Latin America and Central America, Asia, African region, and also Southeast Asia, and recently also in the Pacific region, covering all the countries in the Pacific area. This slide shows the way that how GGGI engages the member countries in sustainable transport projects. We are having offices in our member countries, which are generally embedded in the governments. So with the understanding of the technical needs and the support the countries need, we follow a programmatic approach, and the identified needs then are transferred to capacity building, technical assistance, and policy and regulatory advice. And the next steps, we follow up to aim to develop large-scale projects and programs that support member countries in matching them with bilateral and multilateral organizations, whom we are also in regular engagement with. So the way we approach our projects in the transport sector can be broadly split up into 2 sections. The first one is linking the e-mobility solution to a smart and public transport infrastructure. The second option B is e-mobility being part of a project which has a main focus on a different sector, such as tourism or solid waste collection. And the third option C is facilitating the adoption of e-mobility in the private sector. In the next slides of this presentation, I will introduce one example of each of these ways we engage with the support for electric mobility adoption. So the first case, which is linking the electric mobility solution to public transport, is in Bali, Indonesia, where we are in a partnership with the Bappenas, the Ministry of National Development and Planning Indonesia, and also the Bali provincial government. We have submitted a bilateral application to the Korean government with a project size of approximately $10 million. It's a grant from the Korean government, and the project consists of 3 core components, which is a roadmap for electromobility distribution, a technical feasibility study for electric buses, and a pilot project with 10 e-buses and 10 charging stations. The plan is to upscale the project in Bali to a smart urban mobility project in a second phase, including an ITS system, a larger amount of electric buses, and capacity building and institutional development based on the learning from the pilot project and the first phase this project is aiming for. The second case is from Jordan. It's the e-mobility component of a tourism project in Petra in Jordan. This is the most recent example of GGGI support to countries to mobilize green finance. GGGI supported the Petra Development and Tourism Region Authority to green a new transport route for tourists visiting the Petra UNESCO World Heritage Site, and also deliver a set of capacity building activities to facilitate the adoption of electric mobility in general. So this is a $1.2 million project. It's the first project GGGI is working under the GEF7 funds, and it has been approved earlier this year. The project supports to integrate electric mobility in improving the sustainability of Petra as a tourist destination in general. And it includes the application of buses and scooters for tourists, the supply of equipment such as charging station, and the EV management center, which also includes activities related to the regulatory framework, capacity building, and investment mobilization. Before the GEF funding, for this project in Petra, we have already supported Jordan with the technical assessment and capacity building for electric buses in the BRT, the bus rapid transit system of the capital Amman, where we developed the GCF concept note based on the technical assessment report we have been preparing. And apart from the work in Jordan, we are currently supporting other member countries in the Pacific region and also in the Asian region to use the GEF8 allocation for electric mobility global program. And as the last example, which is in facilitating the adoption of electric mobility in the private sector. This project is in the initial stages. It's planning to support Land Bank, which is a state-owned bank in the Philippines. And the bank is a GCF Direct accredited entity to deliver the following components, which is a credit line for electric mobility for buses and jeepneys. So it's targeting both privately owned, which are mostly the jeepneys, and electric and buses, not electric yet, which are publicly operated. So it also should include a pilot project and capacity building for the Land Bank, the accredited entity itself, the relevant stakeholders in the private and the public sector. So in this last section of the presentation, the contribution areas, I would like to focus how we are supporting countries in concrete steps to increase the uptake of electric mobility. Our focus is on 3 areas: the regulatory and policy support, capacity building, and knowledge sharing, and the technical support, which is feasibility studies and investment proposal development. So in this slide, you can see the stages of the deliverables we are preparing as an organization, which ranges from the initial steps, such as project idea notes and stakeholder engagement, to facilitating to have a framework that enables the adoption of electric mobility solution, including in particular the regulatory framework. And then moving onwards to feasibility studies, more precise concrete notes and investment proposals, and then also in the implementation of pilot projects and the implementation of programs and projects on a large scale. Here are some examples in specific of the technical support we are providing, which is feasibility studies and coordination with governments and intergovernmental organizations, and the development of project proposals and investment proposals. So this was from my side. Thank you very much, and back to Chanson.
Thank you, Julia. So it is very also, as Julia presented, GGGI very actively supporting our member countries in more than 20 countries to conduct a feasibility study and provide a capacity building. Also, we are supporting our member country to mobilize the financial resources. So based on our previous activities, we are also to support our member country to design and identify ITMO, the project to get the implementation in e-mobility in our member country. Thank you again, Dr. Julia and Mr. Kim, for giving us a brief introduction of the today session's key agenda, including the e-mobility, green finance, and ITMO. And now I'd like to invite 6 panelists as our second part of the session. So before the panel discussion, let me kindly ask all the panelists to turn on your screens. Yes, thank you. Thank you. We have a very distinguished 6 panelists. So according to the fact that the electrification of the transport is a mega trend, that's why the diverse countries have started to set up the electric vehicle target, policies, and measures to support the deployment of the e-mobilities. In this line, I'd like to start with Mr. Fabrice Barisanga, who is the Director General in charge of the transport at Ministry of Infrastructure of the Republic of Rwanda. So Mr. Barisanga, could you please briefly introduce yourself and let us know what is your government e-vehicle target and goal? Thank you, Barisanga. So Mr. Barisanga, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is Fabrice Barisanga. I'm the Director General in charge of transport, the Ministry of Infrastructure, Rwanda, Republic of Rwanda. Basically, I'm going to share the Rwandan perspective for electric mobility. I've prepared some few slides. I don't know whether you can see my screen. I would start with trying to show you the government support, political support to electric mobility. Back in 2019, the excellence head of the state has also committed Rwanda to move into electric mobility to save the environment, but also create jobs to the youth. To achieve that goal, we developed a good number of tools, policies, strategies. Part of the Vision 2050, we envisaged to move toward mass transportation, as well as green transportation. Part of our national determined contributions that we submitted to the UN, we envisaged to have a phased adoption of electric mobility from buses to public to private or passenger vehicles, as well as motorcycles we have in Kigali or upcountry. We also, back in 2021, developed the National Strategy for Electric Mobility Adoption, which has a good number of incentives that I'm going to share with you. There are fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. Among the fiscal incentives, the charging facilities have a more preferential tariff, industrial tariff, which is more or less 60% less than the normal tariff. But also, from peak hours, non-peak time, we also provide a VAT zero for the imported electric motorcycles, being electric vehicles, electric buses, as well as the spare parts. We also, part of the strategy, we are planning to adopt in the near future the carbon tax to discourage the importation of polluting vehicles, internal combustion vehicles. Just to add also on fiscal incentives, the importers do not pay any custom duty to date. That has improved the current market. We also went ahead to provide administrative and non-fiscal incentives. We now plan to have green license plate with time when there is a need to have a green license plate number so that it could be distinguished and the vehicle be given priority. We provide free land for charging stations. Once we have a developer, we discuss and we avail land for especially the one owned by the government, but also specifically for high occupancy vehicles, we are very soon embarking on giving a dedicated lane just to improve mobility within Kigali. If you are bringing an electrical vehicle, you are likely to have a free license, where others are paying a certain license fee. And we also give some other incentives depending on the scale of investment. As I said, we are planning to enforce the emission standard. And with time, because this is a strategy, with time, we would be restricting some of the internal combustion vehicles to access different places, especially within the city center. We also provide preferential electric vehicles for government hired vehicles. We have already started. I will share with you in the next slide. And the investment benefit from the corporate income tax, those investing in electrical mobility. Yes, we have targets, part of the NDC and the electric mobility adoption strategy. We have to get 30% of all electric motorcycles by 2030. That is 8 years horizon. 80% of electric vehicles should be electric. 20% of buses should be electric, and 25% of taxis that are used in Kigali and upcountry should be electric. This is an ambitious target. However, we've already started through support of GGGI. We conducted studies to explore feasibility on charging stations. With support of IFC, the World Bank, we did also a study for the electric buses. We have tested the motorcycles. So far, we have more than 500 electric motorcycles in Kigali, and they're giving a very good result. As a result, we'll, in the near future, allow only the use of electric motorcycles in Kigali for public transport. And we are also in discussion with different partners to start at least with 200 e-buses in the city of Kigali. We are discussing with support of GGGI. We're engaging Korea, we're engaging the World Bank, we're engaging the African Development Bank. And also for the companies providing service to the government, we requested them to have at least 30% of their fleet to be electric within 2 years to come. To date, we have registered almost 4 companies assembling motorcycles in Kigali. We are expecting to have to attract companies to assemble electric vehicles. Of course, it has to be affordable, but the government is really open to have partners in this ambitious journey. We understand the challenges specifically on the financing. In our program 2030, we estimate around $900 million investment. This is huge amount of money, which we believe, working with different partners, we'll be able to mobilize, especially for acquiring buses, providing charging infrastructure at different places so that you can also encourage people to buy buses. For motorcycles and tricycles, there is a good market penetration in Kigali and up countries, and we believe that the global green financing would be helpful, not only to reduce the capex for electric fleet, but also to support in establishing charging infrastructure. I thank you so much.
Thank you, Barisanga. Even the Rwanda is very early in the morning, so he's very kindly participating in this session. Thank you again. And I understand how the Rwanda governments are willing to distribute the electric vehicle in the country, and they provide a diverse set of policy measure to attract the more private sector into this sector, such as they're providing the financial incentive and non-financial incentives, and also they set up the specific target for each the transport mode, including the electric buses and the taxis, electric two-wheelers. So they divided it very significantly. So I believe that there will be the very good progress in the transport sector. And based on the very strong willingness of the government, GGGI also have very actively working together with the Rwanda government. So we already conducted a technical stance on introducing electric buses and installing the charging station in Kigali city. And also for implementing the electric mobility, we also invited the Korean government to identify the ITMO cooperation between the Korea and Rwanda. So thank you again, Mr. Barisanga. And we also have a panelist from Fiji government. So let me invite Mr. Kamal Gaunda. He is a manager, budget management and economy policy at Ministry of Economy of the Republic of Fiji. So Mr. Gaunda, can you hear us? Okay, Mr. Gaunda. Mr. Kamal Gaunda, I believe that you are on the... Okay, I think there is some the internal issue or technical issue. So I will invite again the Mr. Kamal for the next time. Okay, green finance can play a major role in the decarbonization of the transport through the lending to sustainable transport sectors. Also, the Green Climate Fund was established to support the developing country to tackle the climate change. Also, Green Climate Fund was working as one of the important financial mechanism under the UNFCCC. So also recently, GCF has approved the e-mobility project in India and Latin America countries. So today we also invite a green finance expert, Mrs. Eugene Kim, who is a manager and gender specialist in the KDB, Korea Development Bank. Korea Development Bank is the first the Korea accredited entity to GCF. So Mrs. Kim, I hope the Mrs. Kim is there. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you, Mr. John.
Great. So Mrs. Kim, is there any specific or innovative financial model or instrument for e-mobility distribution? So that would be very helpful for us. Thank you.
Thank you for your invitation at first, and also thank you very much for that question, because as a financier, KDB receives that question very frequently from many stakeholders engaging the e-mobility initiative across the world. But actually, as a person loving the engagement of e-mobility in developing and emerging markets, my answer is that there is no silver bullet innovative financial model for facilitating the adoption of e-mobility. Actually, we know that it truly depends on the project-specific and country-specific circumstances. Really, even the identical project may require different financial solutions according to surrounding circumstances of a targeted project. We know that. However, as a financier, I would like to share a single point with all of you, like the point which must be considered when we are brainstorming and structuring the financial model for e-mobility. Just imagine a situation that there are two choices in front of you. One is the conventional engine motorbike, and the other choice is the electronic motorbike. What is your choice? And if you answer that, my choice goes to the conventional ICB motorbikes, then I think in such case the financial model failed. However, if your choice goes to the electronic car, electric motorbike, then your financial model seems like successful, which implies that really finance, like structuring the financial model of e-mobility initiative, it's not about just finance. Really, financiers must embrace and consider all the relevant matters surrounded by the intervention. For instance, I am a person really loving this sector. However, if I have that two choices, my choice also goes to the conventional engine model, because in my house and in my company, there's no e-charging station fully established. So I don't want to spend my extra time to find out and visit e-charging stations somewhere in my country, but not nearby my home or my company. So it's like we have to consider that like charging infrastructure facilities and also the payment system of the country. And also, is it the B2B model, B2C model, B2G model? We have to really consider all the matters together. And also, I had a very strong impression from the Rwanda ministry, the previous presenter, because when it comes to deploying the e-mobility project, the government engagement, especially the policy incentive, is really critical, because we already know that the e-mobility sector is still need a lot of high level of concessionality compared to the conventional engine motorbike and engine transport system. In that perspective, the government engagement in terms of policy and regulatory framework support is really important, which means that not only financiers really must consider and come up with the best financial solution together with a number of discussions and consultations with various stakeholders, including government and private sector as well. So my answer is that there is no silver bullet as single solution. However, it's not just about finance. We have to consider and discuss with various stakeholders to find out the best financial model together.
Great, thank you. So let me ask you one more question. So as an accredited entity to G-shape your organization, so is there any plan or strategy for e-mobility, developing the e-mobility project through the G-shape?
Yes, of course. Thank you for the question again. We can share our ambition in this place, in this session. Yes, of course, KDB is really interested in the transport sector, because as a GCF accredited entity, KDB recognizes that out of the total GCF approved their investment portfolio, the low carbon transportation, the sector still we can see a lack of funding proposals approved compared to other result areas of GCF investment portfolio. So we are very interested in this transportation sector, and also KDB is not only GCF accredited entity, but also KDB is a state-run policy bank, and we know the power of the private sector engaging together. The private sector engagement is also the key for the sustainability of the e-mobility initiative in every single country. So we would like to be a catalyst for attracting and inviting all the private sector players in this e-mobility sector, leveraging the GCF concessional finance together. And thanks to the GCF approach at first, perhaps last month, Julia from the GGGI introduced one of your pipelines in Indonesia. KDB also briefly listened to that pipeline, and we are very interested in developing our great partnership with the GGGI to promote and deploy that program together in partnership with the GCF, not only GCF, but also GGGI together.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much for your kind answer. And we are very happy to work together with the KDB for developing the GCF for distributing the electric mobility in our member country. Thank you, Mrs. Kim. And as our presenter, Mr. Kim, introduced ITMOs, ITMOs can be utilized as a source for facilitating the absorption of the e-mobility. So in general, but the total cost of the ownership of electric mobility is currently higher than the ones for internal combustion engine vehicles. So the carbon finance through the purchase of international transfer, the mitigation outcomes, ITMO, shall be used to leveling the total cost of ownership differential between the conventional car and electric vehicles. So to understand more about the ITMOs, I would like to invite Mr. Stefan Jill. He is a senior officer for Article 6 program management in GGGI. He is very actively working together with our member country government to set up the ITMO, the framework in our member countries. So Mr. Stefan, just let me first ask very simple question. Even the Mr. Kim explained the ITMO, but let me ask you once again, what is the ITMO?
Thank you, Jason, for the question. And I did see this question being raised in the chat as well. So to get back to basics and make sure we're all on the same page. Before I start, actually, just to mention that if you are interested in this topic, GGGI's carbon pricing global practice is organizing a few more sessions related to Article 6 and carbon markets. 3 more sessions today. Session tomorrow. So please look at the program and meet those sessions if you'd like to learn. So what are ITMOs? People often, ITMOs, people often say ITMOs. Well, as has been pointed out in the chat, stands for internationally transferred mitigation outcomes. So these are essentially the emission reductions that are transferred between countries under the Paris Agreement's Article 6 mechanism. It's essentially carbon credits traded internationally under a UN framework. Generally, these trades are results-based financing. So on the emission reduction actually happening, there is a payment. But I do recognize that Mr. Kim earlier mentioned a different model. And of course, there is the opportunity for prepayments as well, but generally, this is a results-based financing model. So why do countries take part in ITMO trades? Well, for getting a few comments saying that the audio is not clear. I'm trying to switch it. Thank you. Think that'll be better. So I hope you were able to catch enough of what I said to this point. I was going to introduce, I guess, the concept of why countries might participate in Article 6. Well, for countries that might buy, they can use them towards the achievement of their NDCs, going beyond what they can achieve in their own country with domestic actions. For countries that sell ITMOs, the additional finance can help to unlock activities that otherwise wouldn't happen. Chang-sun mentioned reducing the lifetime cost of ownership of electric vehicles, and therefore these sorts of payments can make the business models more attractive and can make activities happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise in these host countries, going beyond their NDCs. According to the Article 6 rulebook, in order to be an ITMO, an emission reduction needs to be real. So that means it has to have already happened and have been measured. They have to be verified. That means independently verified by a third party. And they must be additional. They wouldn't have happened in the absence of the finance from the sale of the ITMOs. The emission reductions, and again, I'll use the word carbon credits again, because I think a lot of people are familiar with that. They can be verified and issued under a variety of standards, including the CDM successor that Mr. Kim mentioned earlier, the Article 6.4 mechanism, or it could be through independent standards like the gold standard or Vera, or even any bilateral standards agreed between two countries. Cooperation between countries under Article 6 can help to raise global ambition in climate mitigation. And the general logic of carbon trading is that efficiency is achieved by directing investment to where it can achieve the most mitigation. So greater emission reductions can be achieved at the same cost through trading than with no trading. And Article 6 promotes ambition directly by enabling countries to adopt more ambitious NDCs. For example, Korea raising the ambition of its NDC in late 2021 by committing to purchase 33.5 million ITMOs by 2030. But Article 6 can also contribute to ambition raising in countries that sell ITMOs in several ways, by promoting investments in new or nascent technologies, i.e. EVs or electric mobility in general is a very good example of this. Providing proof of concept of different models, creating new supply chains, developing new skills and capabilities, all of which can lead to further investment in these technologies on commercial terms, not requiring the sale of ITMOs. Financing projects might lead to emission reductions greater than those which are transferred to the buyer countries. So ITMO seller countries might decide to keep a share of the emission reductions within their country, and that can enable them to be more ambitious then in terms of what they commit to. They could even charge levies on ITMO trades that could be reinvested in further mitigation activities as well. And there are also other mechanisms which are in place to help to ensure that ITMO trading is not just a zero-sum game. For example, the cancellation of ITMOs for OMGE, or overall mitigation of global emissions. So yeah, ITMOs are a trade between two countries under the Article 6 mechanism that can help to bring more financing and unlock additional activities in these countries.
Thank you, Stefan. It's very much better clear for me to understand the ITMO. So I believe that the GGGI is leading the organizations for the ITMO. So actually GGGI, there is a carbon pricing unit, which is a division for the dealing with the ITMO and cooperating with our member country. So let me ask you one more again. Definitely the carbon pricing unit is the leading the division for the ITMO. So what can you provide to our member country for ITMO cooperation?
Sure. And so maybe I'll focus a little bit on e-mobility as well. I think the first answer that I gave was quite general. So GGGI works with our member and partner governments under several programs to get ready for Article 6, to put in place the institutional frameworks required to engage in Article 6. and also developing actual projects and even policies that can generate ITMOs that could be traded. So if I focus on the host country perspective and what might be very relevant to do for e-mobility, I think the first thing that we can support countries with is determining what sorts of projects it would authorize ITMOs from, and whether e-mobility projects would be eligible, so that project developers know that they can focus effort on developing such projects with Article 6 in mind. And I'll give it a little bit of context to what we mean here. Whereas under the CDM or under voluntary markets, allowing carbon crediting projects to go ahead under those markets didn't really come with any downsides for the host countries. But under Article 6, all countries now have NDC targets. And Mr. Kim referred to this earlier. In order to avoid double counting, if a country transfers ITMOs to another country, it cannot count these emission reductions towards its own targets. It must add them back in to its emissions balance when they report to the UNFCCC, and this is known as a corresponding adjustment. So as a result, countries need to be careful about what they authorize as ITMOs to avoid transferring so many ITMOs, and that means adding those emissions back into the emissions balance in the reporting, that it could become difficult to meet their own NDC. So to manage this risk, countries can consider carbon finance in their NDC financing strategy. While some projects can be financed with domestic public finance or private finance with no international support, these are typically what is included in a country's unconditional NDC, and probably wouldn't be considered additional because they would have happened anyway. But other projects do require some form of international support to go ahead, which could be through grants or loans or results-based finance like carbon finance. And e-mobility projects in many developing countries will currently fall into this category, not commercially viable at the moment under existing models with existing skills and capabilities, and with not enough domestic public resources to implement. So to identify whether these projects might work best for Article 6 versus other types of concessional financing, countries can look across a few dimensions. So one dimension is the ability to measure and monitor the emission reductions generated by a project to the level of robustness required for the emission reductions to be verified independently. And carbon crediting mechanisms typically have approved methodologies that are followed to set baselines and measure the additional emission reductions from a project. We mentioned earlier what's available under the CDM, which had one really relevant methodology, switching from these. The biggest voluntary standard, Vera, also has only one methodology, systems. But under Article 6, countries could also agree to develop their own methodologies. Might be difficult for some countries, but other countries, particularly those which have domestic offsetting schemes like Thailand or Colombia or South Africa, certainly would have the capacity to do so. If there are methodologies, we also need to consider the data available to develop baselines and understand the market. So what countries can do is to look at the MRV systems that exist in the transport sector to see how those can be improved to support the development of carbon projects in their country. Another dimension is whether there is the mitigation potential from projects that would make it worthwhile to incur the costs of monitoring and reporting. So as was mentioned a couple of times before, in the developing world, 2- and 3-wheelers are the predominant private source of or form of transports, vehicular transports. But the emissions reductions available from an individual vehicle might not be particularly high, maybe 1 or 2 tons per 2-wheeler per year, depending on the grid. And so depending on the price of an ITMO over 10 years, it might not be enough of an incentive to unlock the project unless interesting and innovative financing models or scalable models are developed. And so this is why we've seen there have been e-mobility projects developed under Article 6 to date. There haven't been many projects at all developed under Article 6 to date, but there are examples of e-mobility, and these ones have focused on e-buses. Switching from diesel to e-buses, and a very good example of this is in Thailand, where Thai government have recently signed an agreement with Switzerland to cooperate under Article 6, and we expect the first project to be related to e-mobility in buses under that agreement. Other things to consider would be capability gaps within the private sector and within the government to assess the projects, not to mention, I suppose, the financing available. And I think that's been mentioned a few times already around different sorts of models. But overall, e-mobility is an exciting sector when it comes to Article 6 and ITMOs. For most countries, e-mobility is an area that is hard to stimulate using existing resources, so any form of additional finance is welcome. That also makes it quite attractive from a buyer point of view. The ITMOs that come from this sector are likely to be additional, more likely to be additional than from other sectors. So I think we can expect to see more projects being developed in this sector under Article 6. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan. So, okay, as you can see, and as you can hear, if you are interested in the ITMO and any other project, yeah, please contact Mr. Stefan. Maybe he will very kindly, support you how to develop the ITMO project for your countries. And now move on to the Korea, the ITMO situation. So I understand that Korea also, they have started to set up the ITMO strategy and plan. So for hearing more about the Korea situation, so let me invite a principal researcher, Dr. Cheo in Green Technology Center, which is operating under the Korea Ministry of Science and ICT. So Dr. Oh, could you please explain whether market mechanism is a viable option for mobilizing investment for e-mobility? And could you please explain the Korea government strategy for ITMO? Thank you.
Thank you, moderator, for your warm introduction. And I'd like to express my appreciation to GGGI for inviting me here to panel discussion session today. I'd like to share my thoughts on the questions made by the moderator. First, with regard to the question on the viability of market mechanism for mobilizing investment for mobility, my answer is yes. The market mechanism can be a highly viable option for mobilizing investment for e-mobility. This is because we already have experience of mobilizing finance for mitigation projects on electric vehicles through the market mechanism, particularly the CDM under the Kyoto Protocol. As already mentioned by the presenter, Mr. Kim from KRIC, there are 27 mitigation projects in transportation sector. And out of those, there are several mitigation projects on electric vehicles. And if you look into the project description, these projects were designed for the production and adoption of electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles, and mainly two-wheeler electric vehicles. I think this CDM project experience with electric vehicles tell us two things. One is that the market mechanism actually worked as a viable track with which to devise a mitigation project on the adoption of electric vehicles and to galvanize investment. And the other is that circumstances have changed a lot compared to the times when the CDM projects were designed and undertaken. Battery technology went through considerable technological development and cost reduction. Customers' acceptance of electric vehicles has increased substantially. The matter of infrastructure is being dealt with more care. Therefore, if we have new and revised methodologies to calculate and monitor emission reduction in tandem with technological progress for not only two-wheeler, but also four-wheeler electric vehicles, I think the market mechanism will work as a source of financial mobilization for mobility. Also, with regard to the question on the current status, Korea's response or strategy to obtain ITMOs, I would like to say, I'd like to be very cautious in saying that, but anyhow, I'd like to say that Korea is in preparation for the ways to obtain ITMOs through market-based approaches of cooperative approaches and sustainable development mechanism based on the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. As already mentioned by Mr. Kim from KRIC and the panelists from the GGGI, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement provides a ground for the formation of global carbon market. And there are two market-based approaches in Article 6. One is cooperative approaches, and the other is sustainable development mechanism. And along the line of cooperative approaches, there are several experimental approaches that are already formed and operated by countries, such as Japan's joint crediting mechanism or Switzerland's ITMO purchase agreement. With these exemplary cases in mind, Korea now considers two ways of obtaining ITMOs. First is to establish Korea's own carbon market, global carbon market mechanism. And this is called bilateral cooperative framework. And this mechanism is designed for Korea to undertake mitigation projects with its own financial and technological resources in collaboration with partner countries to generate, transfer, and obtain ITMOs. The second way of obtaining the ITMOs the Korean government considers right now is to purchase ITMOs from project implementers from spot market or contract market directly. Currently, specifics for these approaches are not confirmed yet. That is because the Article 6 rulebook was formulated last year. So Korea is right now trying to reflect the essential rules of the Article 6 rulebook in the design of Korea's cooperative approaches to obtain ITMOs. I think from this Korea's responses to obtain ITMOs, I think there are three things to share. One is that those specifics for Korea's approaches to obtain ITMOs are not finalized. Korea is going to be engaged actively in the obtainment of ITMOs. Government's public finance will be put into these approaches. And currently, transportation sector is being dealt with as an important mitigation project category. So this is a very viable option for Korea and the partner countries to consider to design and implement mitigation projects with e-mobility. Another is that in order to utilize Korea's ITMO obtainment approaches, there should be some efforts to prepare and formulate methodologies to estimate and monitor greenhouse gas emission reductions with the production and adoption of electric vehicles. The last one is that, as I mentioned before, market mechanism is a viable option for mitigation projects on the production and adoption of electric vehicles, because these mitigation activities can generate ITMOs. This means that there can be a lack of financial resources for the subsidiary activities, such as the expansion of electric charging facilities and grid infrastructure, because these activities do not directly generate mitigation outcomes. Therefore, when the mitigation project on the adoption of electric vehicles is designed through market-based mechanisms, the e-mobility infrastructure also needs to be considered by the utilization of other financing channels together. These are all for now for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. O. So Dr. O is the UNFCCC's negotiator for the Korea Ministry of Science and ICT. So she is very actively conducting the research activity in the climate change sector. Thank you, Dr. O. And private sector, the participation and investments at a scale are critical for the electric mobility agenda to succeed in the countries. So it is very significantly important to find the solutions that can be implemented to address the risks and barriers that the private sector faces and to unlock the potential for the development of the e-mobility. To understand the private sector's challenges and barriers, I'd like to ask the Dr. Manny Jose Bayona a couple of questions. So Dr. Bayona is working on executive director in Electric Vehicle Association in Philippines. And also he is serving the Enrique Lazon Junior Logistics Institute of De La Salle University as an executive dean. So Dr. Bayona, what do you think of the major obstacles or challenges for private sector to do e-mobility business or purchase electric vehicle? Thank you.
Before anything else, I'd like to thank GGGI for inviting me to be part of this forum. Yeah. By the way, the Philippines, we just had our Electric Vehicle Industry Development Act approved last February, last April, and now we're in the final stages of crafting the comprehensive roadmap for the electric vehicle industry, which I led and is now scheduled for approval by the different government agencies in November. So what we did under the KRIC is I think it has been highlighted here that it's very important to understand market, and that's what we actually did in crafting the comprehensive roadmap. And we eventually decided to break down the electric vehicle market to 4 components. One is on the household, one is on the corporate sector, that includes the logistics and the tourism, and then the public transport, and then the government. And what we realize is support requirements for the different sector really varies a lot. So we try to rationalize the programs based on the sector, actually it's based on the vehicle and based on the sector. And what really turned out in the analysis is there is a lack of trust in a lot of aspects. Okay, number one, lack of trust on the technology, lack of trust on the financial feasibility of the vehicles. This lack of trust also in the quality and the performance of the vehicles. And of course, a very important thing is that in a lot of cases also the adoption of the vehicles have been very expensive. So yeah, and the barriers varies across the different sectors. For public transport, for example, if you've been to the Philippines, most of the public transport in the Philippines are informal with very limited capacity. So viability would have to define into 3 points. Okay, number one, for an electric vehicle to be viable for public transport, number one, it needs to have a competitive equity requirements. So if you're only paying, let's say, just an example, $1,000 as an equity to have the loan for an ICE, and if you're paying $2,000 for EV, that becomes a problem, because formally the public transport sector in the Philippines don't have the capacity really to invest. Okay, that's number one. Okay, number two, the total cost of ownership should be competitive. It should provide savings, but it doesn't end there. Okay, the third point is actually very important. You need to be able to ensure that not at any point in the life of the vehicle wherein the operating cost should be higher than that of the internal combustion engine. Because normally we might have some savings on the total cost of ownership, but normally you're spending more in the early phases of the ownership when you were still paying up for the loan. But for the public transport sector, okay, that is not possible. It's a different case, for example, when you're looking at the corporate sector. Normally they have the capacity to invest, but nevertheless, what matters is the bottom line. So the total cost of ownership would have to be insured. In the Philippines, yeah, well, it's good that we look at initially public transport sector, but we're always saying that looks like we got on the wrong foot, because we're trying to push electric vehicle in a sector that is a very poor sector, and yet we're pushing a very expensive we're pushing a very expensive product, and as I've mentioned, we have to satisfy 3 points before kitty vehicles eventually gets adopted. Yeah, so I think that is very, very important. Really understand what matters most to the sector. And also one strategy that we're looking at in the Philippines is we're going to focus support to the high mileage sectors like the corporate, the public transport, and to some degree to some branches of the government. So if other countries have been providing subsidies even for the households, it's something that might be very tricky for the Philippines considering the limited resources. So Philippines, it would rather focus whatever support to high mileage, daily mileage sectors like, as I've said, public transport, corporate logistics, and tourism. So Philippines is adopting a highly rationalized approach and realizing also its limitations and realizing what are the challenges in adopting electric vehicles. If you look at the NDCs in the Philippines, 70% of those are conditional to multilateral and bilateral support. So in the query that we have crafted, it's mostly anchored on financing. Okay, hopefully sourcing the seed funds from multilateral and bilateral sources, and focusing on financing, not even subsidies, because as I mentioned also, Philippines is a developing country. We don't really have much resources. Okay, but I think what goes well with the Philippines is we've got a very high cost of very high cost of money, and rolling out a soft financing program alone could already tip the balance, and could have a very big impact. So in the long term, Philippines is looking in that direction. But it was also mentioned that it's not only financing. Of course, infra is also in there, and there's also a program for charging infrastructure. But looking at high mileage sectors like public transport and corporate and logistics, it might not be the challenge is not that big compared to household charging infrastructure requirements, because you're looking at the fleet. You can always plan out your system, and the key with the charging infra anyway for the feasibility is the utilization rate, something that can be assured if you're looking at the fleet, if you're looking at fleet vehicles. So the key really is rolling out the corresponding financing program, and also but even though you roll out the financing program, we're not also expecting that the industry will be adopting electric vehicles that much really. So it is also important that there should be mandates. I think that could be easily attached to what we call the technology inertia. So under the query, we have also introduced some mandated adoptions like in the public transport, tourism, corporate, and ensuring also that there would have managing also the resistance by introducing the required financing support. In the case of the Philippines government, as I mentioned, we have limited resources, so I expect the government is quite reluctant in providing providing subsidies, especially if it's coming from its fiscal collection. So, but there has been some openness in providing support if vehicles are produced locally, because that's also one thing I think that's very common among developing countries. It would want to develop also its industry while pushing for electric vehicles. So in the country, support might be available if provided that vehicles are produced locally, and there are market mechanisms that are being introduced that hopefully will be introduced for that, and that are drafted under the credit. But as I said, it's just a draft. Things will be finalized next month, and fingers crossed, most of the programs put forward will be approved. Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Bayona. So let me ask one final question to the Director General, Dr. Frank. So previously, when we select the key technology for supporting our member country in the transport sector, I understand under your guidance, we select the e-mobility. So why you are choosing the e-mobility? Thank you.
Thank you, Changsung. Well, I thought this panel made some good explanations, and you did at the start as well. Since there is both a very large emission from transportation, and there are some good technologies in this space, there's definitely a good opportunity. Countries like Norway show that if there is enough money and enough policy behind an effort to introduce e-mobility, you can get up to 80%, 90% of all new vehicles being bought by consumers. They're interesting to ride as well. You know, earlier I think we had Ms. Georgina Kim say, if you can choose between an electric motorbike and an ICE motorbike, what would you take? Well, I have my motorbike license. I haven't ridden an electric motorbike for a while. I did one little test drive in Rwanda a few years ago in our Africa Green Growth Week, but I see many articles about how exciting electric motorbikes are. So that I think is not really a problem either. They are fun to drive. They can be a great form of transportation. So maybe indeed it is exactly what you focused on here today, the financing that is a key obstacle. And that is an area where GGI can really help come up with good solutions, good business models, and try to bring green and climate finance to the table. So I think it is a very good example of where GGI can use its technical expertise to support our members and help making the world a bit greener. And I thought this session today was a very nice overview of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Frank Lisbonman. So today we have learned diverse idea and knowledge of green finance and carbon mechanism for e-mobility distribution from our distinguished panelists and the presenters. I believe that today's session is the venue for the audience to understand how to utilize the financial mechanisms and the market mechanism to facilitate adoption of the e-mobility. So I'd like to express my sincere gratitude for your contribution to the valuable discussion and presentation. So to close the session, I'd like to invite the Assistant Director General Gyeongnam Shin for closing remarks.
Thank you, Jang-sun.
Thank you.
Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. First, on behalf of GGGI, let me express my great appreciation to all of the participants. The transport project for the major economic and social importance in maintaining expected standards of consumption and quality of life. The transport sector is one of the main consumers of fossil fuel, and hence is a major contributor to the total greenhouse gas emission, around 20%, according to some statistics. But this not only like increase the fossil fuel dependency, but also lead to severe impact on social problems, such as traffic congestion, for health resource waste. The NDC, majority of NDC, saying that transport as a mitigation priority. Multiple countries made sustainable mobility pledge. The sustainability and electrification of transport is one of the mega trends in mobility and is important pillar to achieve in decarbonation. Many countries have established target to ban the sales of conventional cars as early as 2030. As of now, car transport is supporting around 22 projects across all the regions. Currently, we identify some like a good projects such as Rwanda, Mexico, Ecuador. Happy to proceed like a process more resources for Philippines and other like our country in our developing country. And then we look for more sustainable, bankable project to reach the finish line with required financing. In this line, the session was designed to suggest utilizing green finance, ITMO, for facilitating the adoption of e-mobility. Had a very useful discussion and presentation. This is great to know that like there's a huge interest in our project, like the KDB interest, express interest there, like our e-transfer project in Indonesia. Hopefully we can have a more like a strong attention from potential financier in multiple project portfolio in GGGI. I hope all you or participants find the session informative and serve as a occasion to consider green finance ITMOs, potential resource of the green transformation in the transport sector. Thank you so much. You're joining us, and particularly like a panelist and then presenter.